Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our third webinar of our summer series, I.T.E.A.C.H, where we are talking about education, assessment, and current happenings in today's education market. My name is Allison Boyven, and I am on the marketing team here at Riverside Insights, and I will be your host for today's webinar alongside another former educator, Christina Jordan, who is the National Academic Advisor and works with many of our achievement assessments. If you missed last Tuesday's webinar in the I.T.E.A.C.H series, we had Dr. Kathy Welch and Dr. Steve Dunbar with us to walk us through how to understand assessment scores that appear on norm reference assessments, looking at standard scores and national percentile ranks. And they shared with us the value of scores for program placement and classroom instruction, and how to explain scores to students and parents. Today, we are really excited to welcome two district administrators from Evansville Vanderburgh School Corporation. They're here to join us for a discussion about data used to identify foundational skill gaps in reading, interventions in place to support Tier 2 and Tier 3 students, and how the interventions are being tracked. We're going to talk goal setting, best practices, and a lot of what they're doing in their district to move student reading ability forward. But before we get started formally, I wanted to share with you a few announcements. Throughout this summer, we are providing webinars on various education topics, talking about measurement of student longitudinal growth, how assessment data informs instruction, and creating a positive culture in which to test and talk about assessment data. So be sure to join us each week as educators share their thoughts and perspectives on the given topic. Look for the weekly webinar invites. And today, during the session, you may have some questions that you would like our speakers to answer. And we definitely welcome those questions. So please type those into the Q&A panel displayed on the right side of your screen. It's going to look something like this here on the right side. And we will be sure to share your questions as the topic arises during today's discussion. Handouts for today's session are located under the Handouts triangle in the right side panel, so be sure to download those. And also today's session is being recorded, and you will receive the recording, copy of the slides, the handout, and a certificate of attendance. All will be sent in the next day or two, so be sure to look for that in your inbox. Also, recordings of all of our previous webinars can be found on our website at info.riversideinsights.com/K12PD. Opening this page provides you the header that's shown here, and both of the previous I.T.E.A.C.H webinars are included on that page. All right, so now on to today's presentation and discussion. Today, we are very excited to welcome Brenna Kelly, who's Director of Psychological Services, and Sandy Moore, the Director of Early Learning Initiatives, both from the Evansville Vanderburgh School Corporation in Indiana. And they're going to talk about reading assessments they administer, how they're helping students recover from unfinished learning, and how they progress monitor students in reading throughout the year. So I'll let both of them introduce themselves to our audience before we continue.
Okay. And like she said, I'm Brenna Kelly. I'm a school psychologist by trade, and recently took over the position as the director of the Office of Psych Services here in the Evansville Vanderburgh School Corporation. So I oversee the school psychologists and supervise them, and then work on many district teams to kind of support the district work that happens kind of behind the scenes.
And I'm Sandy Moore, and I'm the director of early literacy for grades K through 3.
Wonderful. All right, well, it's really great to see also so many literacy specialists with us today. We have assessment and special education administrators joining, principals and assistant principals, and teachers. So many different roles within our audience. So we are excited for you all to join us as we go forward in this discussion about reading. All right, so just to get us started and help everyone become familiar with your district, can you please share with us about Evansville Vanderburgh School Corporation, particularly in terms of where you all are located, the size of your district, student population, and some other information.
Yeah, so we're almost as far south and west as you can get in Indiana. We're in that little toe of the boot, if you will, and we are a pretty big metropolitan area. We're the third largest school district in the state of Indiana. We have roughly 40 schools. We have several alternative schools included in that. And then we have around 22,000 students that we serve from pre-K all the way up through 12th grade. And you can see kind of our statistics for our diversity, and one of our alternative schools was in the virtual academy. And so we actually were doing virtual learning prior to the pandemic. And this was a small population of students, I think maybe around 200, maybe a little bit less, may have been even closer to lower than 100 prior to the pandemic. And then that was just offered to some students who a virtual learning environment was going to be better suited for their learning. And there was an application process and a whole thing. When the pandemic hit, we ballooned up in that virtual school. And so we did have a lot more students who chose that option, but we actually did remain, we were closed from March through the end of the school year during that 19-20 school year. And then during the 2020-2021 school year, we were actually back in person and open, 6 feet apart with masks. But so we did want to put that caveat on. And it was a little bit tricky during that time to do those small groups and do the interventions that we had been doing and offering that. And I had some really great creative teachers who were doing some great instruction with small groups and doing their best, and even had small group mini WebExes running within the classroom. So students were working on independent work, and she had like 5 or 6 students pull up on their devices and had a small group there with them. But there were challenges with that. Even though we were running a small group and doing our best, the mirrored image in the camera. So a student was, asked to write down the letter that makes the B sound, or the B, and they wrote down the letter B, but held it up to the teacher. And she said, no, that's a D. And it was like, I was behind the student and I shook my head. I was like, no, it was right. It was right. And she's like, I didn't even think about that. So those challenges that we engaged in and all muddled through, like I said, we were pretty fortunate that we were able to stay open and kept cases pretty low in our buildings. But we know that the level of education, even within our school that year, suffered just because we were all doing the best we could, but it wasn't what we were used to. And then wanted to talk a little bit about the GAIN initiative. This was also something our school district has been doing prior to the pandemic. We had a pretty big district-wide push. I think it was the 2017-2018 school year when we all schools were kind of doing the GAIN initiative. We piloted it in some of our smaller schools and higher need schools, where we were really focusing on what GAIN stands for is growth in academics through innovation and neuroeducation. So really working with our students and teaching them about the brain, and teaching our teachers how to teach about the brain. And so helping teachers understand the value of having that calm, alert, ready to learn state with our students and also within themselves. And so really giving them skills to work on classroom management, as well as giving the students some skills to recognize when they start to become dysregulated, and what skills and what they would need to do to kind of work on that regulation within the classroom setting. And then also if recognizing when they may need to just take a minute and take a step out, or we also work in kind of figuring out the student's day. Like we notice every time right before math, the student just maybe needs a little bit of a reset, and so sometimes that student may need to leave the classroom, go to a self-regulation room where there's lots of different sensory items and different things, maybe just some calming music, a lot of different options for the student. Some students go there directly when they come off the bus in the morning and kind of do a quick reset and then go to their classroom. So we kind of build kind of those self-regulation skills and opportunities for those students throughout the day into their schedule as needed.
And adding a little bit to the neuroeducation and just the brain and learning, we have also provided letters training to all of our K-2 teachers, and we have adopted a structured literacy curriculum that supports that learning as well.
I wanted to ask about as far as with GAIN, have you seen the academic gains with having GAIN within the district? Have you seen that growth?
We started to, and then of course, you know, that crazy thing, the pandemic, right? Where we really had to do a lot of reset and across the board. And so we have seen some also with teachers just reporting, being able to, you know, get kids back in and settled after recess and building those routines and not having all of the lost learning time within the classroom, right? So that we've seen some benefits. And then that tricky thing, that pandemic really threw a wrench in some of our data, but we were able to see some of that, you know, just in teachers and understanding those students a little bit better and recognizing, you know, it's a scary place now, in a different type of scary, right? With the pandemic and coming back in and sitting closer to my friend. And I just got back from Disney World a few weeks ago, and it was really weird to be that close to people again. It's still, right? We're all still trying to get used to it. So I think what the benefit was, it really helped some of our students who have a tendency to be a little more anxious kind of continue to work on those self-reg skills to get them back to a state where they can focus on that learning.
And prior to, like, we had huge initiatives for group work and those instructional practices that were doing that. And GAIN really helped kiddos teach how to get along with one another. And then once, like Brenda was saying, we were separated, you know, that cut that barrier out there. So now we're like bringing all those instructional practices, those Kagan strategies, those sort of things, and integrating it with what we're learning in GAIN. And it's been super beneficial in cutting down on behavioral issues and just students being more confident and happy in the classroom.
And working on those team-based skills too.
And professional development for teachers? I imagine there was a lot to
There's
help get them.
ongoing.
Okay.
Yes, always. That's what you see, the big sigh. That's what Sandy and I are both working on, professional development things in the summer now, working with our teachers and trying to get them up to speed on our new curriculum initiatives and interventions and data pieces. Last year, we had 2 new interventions as well as the progress monitoring piece. We pushed out our Easy CBM and did that across the board. Some schools were piloting it, but yeah, so we had a lot of PD that happened last year.
And it's an exciting time because we're integrating all of those things. People are understanding that they're not just siloed initiatives, that they're all intertwined and work together. So it's fun to watch. I mean, I say fun, but it's just exciting to see and motivating to see everyone making connections and their mindsets shifting because they see what works and they see the growth in their kids, which spurs on that motivation.
Sure. That's amazing.
Well, can I just add kudos to you all, because even though you said that got interrupted during the pandemic, which happened to all schools, it sounds like you gave your kids some really great foundational tools that probably made transitioning back a lot easier. So that's amazing. That's really exciting to hear. So speaking of post-pandemic, I think that most of us probably saw the recent NAEP data that came out and showed that most students across the country showed a steep decline in their reading scores. So we're just going to dive into your assessment practices, and can you share with us about how you are screening your students? Do you universally screen your students in reading? And how do you assess their foundational skills? And how do you determine, once you've screened those students, who are your at-risk students?
Yeah, so we do use a variety of screening tools. So we use NWEA as our main universal benchmark, and that is given to students from kindergarten through 10th grade, I believe. And so they are screened in the reading and the math 3 times a year. And then our K-2 students, Indiana has a dyslexia law that was pushed out several years ago. And so we are asked to screen all of our kindergarten through 2nd graders on characteristics of dyslexia. So that covers the kind of 5 big areas, and the state has an approved list of screeners that we had to choose from. And so we use Amira for that. And then we also this is getting down, not out of our universal screeners, but we have iRead 3 as well as iRead 2, and that's just our state-based reading assessment. And if students do not pass as a 3rd grader, they're asked to repeat 3rd grade reading instruction. And there are some waivers and some things like that that are available to some students, but we provide remediation and have to do some different things with those students. But for our students who we suspect may have more reading difficulties, we typically get with our MTSS teams, but we kind of have a guideline of some data that we use to students who are falling kind of below that 20th percentile on our NWEA benchmark. We discuss and say, do we think this, kind of dive into their data a little bit there and discuss as an MTSS team and pull classroom information, parent information, all of the things, and discuss, do they need that remediation or do they need that intervention for reading? And then we would place them in our reading intervention program. And we have a number of different ones and offered at different grade levels or based on the student need. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But we also look at, like I said, just making sure that we're looking at that whole child through that MTSS team. Maybe it's an attendance issue, or the student was really sick that day and scored at the 10th percentile, but we know that student really isn't, so sometimes we would either rescreen or do something like that and look at that piece. So it's really kind of a team approach to determining.
And students that are flagged at risk on the universal screener, they will automatically go into an Orton-Gillingham intervention.
For the Amira, yeah, for the dyslexia screener, and that's kind of a state mandated thing as well. That we were given a list of programs, and it had to be multisensory, and had to have a big checklist of things that we had to do. But we were already kind of looking at some of those kiddos and identifying them and putting them in a research-based intervention.
So do you have a lot of teachers that are Orton-Gillingham certified then in order to provide that intervention?
We do. As a district, we provided that training to students when we first started the screen, or to teachers, sorry, when we first started screening 3 years ago.
And then do you utilize any progress monitoring then for those students that you're providing interventions, so that you have those probes to check and see if your interventions are working or if they need to be tweaked throughout the year?
Yes, so several years ago, or kind of prior to last year, we were using just kind of progress monitoring checks that were built into the interventions. More skills like that were being taught within the intervention, which was not really showing me growth and showing whether that student, yep, they mastered this one skill this week, but did they gain in skills over time? So we really looked at pulling a different progress monitoring tool that we could compare students across our district as well. And so we used EasyCBM 2 years ago, kind of as the Classroom Teacher Deluxe version of that, and piloted it in some of our schools. And then as a district last year, we chose to do that for just our intervention students and to progress monitor all of our students who are receiving reading intervention. Actually, all intervention, reading and math. You know, this we're just focusing a little bit on reading here, but we use the EasyCBM probes for reading as well as the math to check progress and to see if students are gaining over time. And that has been an invaluable tool because it allowed us to make quick decisions as far as, okay, I don't have to wait till that next benchmark to see if they've grown over time or grown in skills. I can quickly look. I think we're giving like the fluency measures every 2 weeks. And so we had, and some teachers really liked giving them and seeing that progress. So some teachers were even giving them weekly. And so we could quickly see, okay, this intervention is working for this student, let's keep them in it. Or, oh, this isn't really a great fit. Maybe we either need to do more time in this intervention or we need to do a different intervention, or, you know, whatever the case may be, maybe we need to look a little more deeply at the student's data all around and see what was really going on.
Can you share a little bit about those research-based interventions you were mentioning in the slide?
So we use like M.A. Rooney, Orton Gillingham for our dyslexia students who have been identified as at risk for our K-2. And then we have Just Words, that is our reading intervention that targets those students who still are needing some decoding skills in like 3rd through 6th or 3rd through 8th. Maybe. And then our reading comprehension intervention, we use 95%. And then we also have some web-based interventions that we utilize, IXL. Some of the schools were also using, yes, I was like, oh, I'm blanking on it, Exact Path. And I want to say some were using, maybe not across the board, but those were ones that were offered to all of our schools. So we have a population that tends to be pretty transient and will transfer schools, so we could plug them right in to the same intervention they were receiving and pretty closely to the same level, you know, or lesson that they were receiving in Orton Gillingham or IXL, of course, their login, that type of thing. Oh, yeah. And for our math interventions, we were a little bit lax in that, but we were using IXL and Georgia numeracy for those.
Yeah, sounds like you have a lot in place.
Yep, and having those multiple measures and getting all those data points, it sounds like you're really able to see exactly where your students are, which is great.
Yes, so we do, like I said, we use a lot of the intervention, the assessments within the intervention to kind of help target skills that students may need, but then also that EasyCBM has been really helpful for that as well, to determine, are we gaining those skills over time, and are we closing that learning gap and showing good growth and getting closer to grade level.
That's great. So I know we've talked a lot about those kids below the 20th percentile and your dyslexic students. And again, going back to what you said earlier, it sounds like you had a lot of things in place pre-pandemic to help when the kids came back in and maybe mitigate some of that learning loss. But how is that unfinished learning playing a role in determining instructional practices in your classroom? And how has that changed from just looking at those really struggling kids to now adding in some of those kids who just missed out on instruction during the pandemic?
Well, I also think we noticed too that our core, we were struggling a little bit in that most important tier, right? That tier 1. And so some of our core teaching and our curriculum, we realized was not maybe up to snuff. And so we did do a curriculum change pretty recently. And so I'll let Sandy talk a little bit about that.
So like I was saying earlier, we've adopted a new curriculum that is structured literacy. And so that has really helped with the K2 students, especially because we have one scope and sequence that we use from K to 2. And so we are able to have our tier 1 instruction on skills at grade level. And within that skills block time, we also break out into small groups where we take where they are at grade level, but then we've also assessed them and we know where they actually are. So let's say at grade level, we're working on C.H, T.E.A.H, S.H, but we're actually, our independent level is working on short vowels. So that small group instruction is going to merge those two skills together to try to give a bridge. So we call that kind of like the tier 1.5. And then then once we go to intervention time, we have an intervention block as well. The kids are able to work at their level at tier 1 during that time. And that's where those students that were flagged or need additional intervention get that multisensory piece added, using that same scope and sequence that they use in tier 1 as well. So it is all a cohesive curriculum.
Mm-hmm. In all of our schools, K through 8, and even at the high school, maybe it's not a daily period, but they do have some time, like a remediation or intervention time at that high school level as well. But every K to 8 building has a 30 to 40 minute intervention period built into their day, where that's where we provide those research-based reading interventions, as well as our math interventions, and then some of our self-reg interventions are also can happen during that time. So sometimes it's like, man, we maybe need more than one 30-minute intervention, trying to get all of those, because we got a kid who needs all 3. It's going to be hard to find time, but we try to make it work.
Yeah, and within our new curriculum as well, for grades 3 through 8, they have, or 3 through 6, they have their reading block, and then there's also an all block, and that also gives a 60-minute period of time to catch up on a lot of those skills that they're seeing deficits within the module block. So it's additional.
All students are participating in this, or just those based on the data that need the interventions?
So everybody participates in something. Some schools get kind of creative and call it the win period, what I need, right? And so we group students. Sometimes our high ability students receive their high ability instruction at that time. Our students needing those reading skills receive those research-based reading interventions, and then students who maybe just need to be stretched and grown or filled in, some gaps at that time, we kind of mix, and teachers kind of share kids back and forth. Again, during the pandemic, it was pretty tricky to do that, but now we're able to, get that flexibility back, and kind of really at grade level teams work closely in PLCs and kind of divide out those kids and see, maybe 9 weeks they might work on a math, or maybe it's, something else they kind of decide and figure out what those students need based looking at those assessments that we've given, whether it's just the benchmark or classroom assessments and things like that. So.
Well, and implementing that win time, I think, is really great. I know my own children had win time in their school, and it was a really great way to focus on if they needed specific skill development, because sometimes they would need to be in a more advanced group, sometimes they needed more intervention support, and so providing that time built into the day is another way. It sounds like you all are really utilizing that data you have to make sure kids are getting instruction exactly at the level they need, which is amazing.
And I think that's a big shift that we have taken, is looking at our assessments and seeing what is that assessment, what information is that going to give us, and allowing times for teachers to collaborate within PLCs and having tight ran PLCs that dig into the data. How am I going to use this, and grouping their students so that they can pinpoint more where their specific needs are, because then we have those structures in place on how to support them.
And making sure teachers know about all of the assessments that are available to them, and what each one can do. So really providing professional development on that piece too.
So that's a great segue into our next question, because when we're talking about giving kids exactly what they need, I imagine that there is some goal setting that is involved in there, right? So
Yes.
how do you use assessments, or I know within EasyCBM we have goal setting tools that help you track and monitor those probes that you're employing with your students, but how do you use goal setting with your students, and how do you determine how to group those students and focus on those goals?
Yeah, so we did use the goal setting tool in EasyCBM, and that was really helpful to see, especially when you're in an MTSS team, pulling up a student's graph and you can see, are they closing that gap? And what the school psychologist worked on developing kind of a goal chart, and we actually looked at sort of kind of growth data across the kind of the benchmarks and EasyCBM, and then wanted to push our kids and say, okay, here was typical growth from this, from beginning of the year to end of the year, but we want to multiply that by 1.5 because we're actually doing more with these students and we're targeting research-based interventions with our students. So we did kind of multiply that by 1.5 and set that as a goal. And so had a little bit stretched goals for those students receiving that intervention, but I know individual teachers also work in classrooms and set goals with their kids. And so some of them would use some of the fluency data and do fluency charts and do fluency reads with students. Some of them will do kind of like a cold read on Monday and then track that student's progress throughout the week on that same passage. And students really kind of like seeing them grow, right, through the week on those. So I think that's motivation and increasing the students' motivation there as well. But we did use, like I said, the EasyCBM goal setting graphs, and teachers and students and teams really liked being able to see that real clear data, because sometimes when you're looking at that graph and it's a 34 and then a 40 and then a 32, it doesn't look like you're moving very close to that goal, but those trend lines and that bright blue goal line did help.
Well, and I love that you're involving your students in that goal setting as well and giving students some agency over their education, which is amazing because that will only increase their success when they can see how they're growing and they know where they need to work. So I love that you're including the kids in the goal setting as well.
Yeah, and we have some students or teachers who will, for NWEA and their next benchmarks, they'll, have them set goals for those as well. But I kind of like that quick graph that you can just see that quick growth too.
And it's great that EasyCBM gives the overarching goals, because in the day-to-day practice within the classroom, even through our curriculum with the EL scope and sequence, kids are making every week, they go through a cycle and work on specific skills, and they have a cycle assessment. And at the end of the week, when they take that cycle assessment, they're getting immediate feedback on, this is how what you did, like in identifying where their mistakes were, getting immediate micro intervention on that, and then setting a goal for themselves for the next week and progressing through the scope and sequence with them. So that takes them through the smaller scale of it. And then when we have EasyCBM, we see the bigger growth.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask the fluency measures within EasyCBM, the passage reading fluency, letter names, letter sounds, word reading fluency, provides those accuracy percentages. Do you all use those?
Some, I think at the MTSS team level probably is where we're going to be breaking that down a little bit more and seeing, do we have a student who's just racing through and it's low on that accuracy, and we may go back and then coach the teacher on, maybe some redirection strategies if you have a student kind of racing through those probes. But so we do look at some of that, but I think teachers, because it was kind of the first year, there was so much that was rolling out for the teachers that we hadn't focused on that as much. But I think as we move through and getting this tool into the teachers and encouraging the teachers to dive into it more, not just at that MTSS team level, having those teachers really look and seeing all of the things that the tool offers can be helpful. I did hear some feedback with teachers, especially when the students kind of took it online and liked being able to see those errors, kind of that reading record for those students, as well as, you know, being able to go back in and for the, not just the fluency, but then the comprehension, you know, knowing which questions the student got incorrect and being able to, you know, talk to them and figure out, you know, maybe a different strategy for answering that question the next time.
Yeah, it is interesting about the and also how students are keeping track, I think, too, of their goals. I think is really insightful here. And then do you use the rate of improvement in EasyCBM?
Yes, so that is something that again, more at that MTSS team level, where we're going to dive in and look at that student and see, are they gaining, and when I was talking about, we multiply that rate of improvement or the by 1.5% or 1.5 times. That's where we, as kind of the school psychologists, are setting that goal on that rate of improvement and monitoring that rate of improvement and seeing if it's closing that gap or what that's looking like there. And we did learn over the year, sometimes when you're progress monitoring at multiple grade levels, we had some teachers who were like, well, I'm going to see how they do at first grade, and I'm a third grade student. And sometimes that would mess up some of the rate of improvements, and they would jump back and forth between some grade levels. And so we've learned kind of over this next year, we try to like stay in that grade level once they're on. You find that right grade level that they need to be progress monitored at, stay there. Until they're ready to move.
Sure. So our next area of focus, we wanted to look at or talk about the data, any scores and reports that you look at to provide key information for really efficiently identifying those skills where students are accelerating and also where they need some support. So you share with us some reports you use, what's most helpful in measuring that student ability in reading.
Yeah, so when we rolled the EasyCBM program out last year, we didn't really get things going until about October. So we just said, well, let's not worry about those benchmarks, especially for the fall. But what we didn't realize what we were doing was it made it more challenging, and then to kind of figure out what grade level the student did need to be progress monitored on, because if they're falling below a specific percentile, you needed to bump back to a grade level. And so benchmarks will give you that percentile right there, and they're being provided at grade level. So there was a little bit of some miscommunication that was happening that we didn't foresee. You think you plan, and then teachers just ran and interpreted some different things. So that's where we had some of that crazy grade level bumping around a little bit. So when we realized what was happening, we did ask our teachers and to do a benchmark on our students in the winter. So do kind of that middle of the year benchmark. And then if they needed to reset grade levels and do some different things like that, they could at that time. So that was where we found that tool useful. And then helping us understand, you know, oh, the student wasn't as at risk as what we were thinking. You know, sometimes it's difficult to see on that progress monitoring graph, although it's got the red, yellow, and gray and green, I think, percentile lines. But sometimes it was nice to see in that quick benchmark graph for that student or report. But what we really like to see and pull up during MTSS discussions on students was that progress monitoring graph and the multiple progress monitoring graphs for that student. Because as you scroll down, you can see, okay, well, they were being progress monitored, maybe in letter sounds, as well as word reading fluency. And, you know, maybe they're not making as much growth on that word reading fluency yet, but they're really flying on that letter sound. So let's, you know, focus more on that word reading fluency, and you can start to see that growth happening there next.
Yeah, so looking at those specific skills.
Yeah.
Which they're really needing some support. Do your reading interventionists maybe look at item analysis and an overall class percentage to see what questions students are missing?
Because we're just doing it with our intervention students, it was sometimes there may only be 1 or 2 students there, or it's a little bit more difficult to target that because they may have a small group where one are receiving intervention from one instructor, but may have a group of students who have 3 different gen ed teachers in that class or in that small group instruction. But it does kind of help us determine, you know, what we need to focus on maybe in that small group and with those students there.
And then the risk analysis report. Do you all look at that between buildings or between schools?
Again, not so much because I think that's more from the benchmark perspective, and because we're only using it with about 4,000 students, 3,500, something like that, who are receiving intervention. We weren't looking at that across the board, but.
And I wanted to ask, in terms of the interventions, I think you all are doing some summer programs as well.
Yes, so we offered a high ability camp this year, and that was a pilot year for just our high ability students. We partnered with the university to kind of make sure all students are growing. And then we have been offering our summer remediation for our students who didn't pass iRead, our iRead 3, and then that has been going on for many years, but we expanded it after the pandemic because we recognized that our kindergarten, first, second graders also needed to kind of close that gap, those skill gaps. And so it's about a 4-week program, kind of a half day of instruction for the students, focused mainly on reading skills and remediating those reading skills.
And then will they be, I'm just thinking, like, will they be assessed at the end, or how do we know that they've done well in their program?
So the ones that are in the iRead remediation, they have an opportunity to take the iRead again at the end of their weeks. Yeah.
And I'm going to plug in because my computer is almost dead.
You need to shift mine. We have technical difficulty here.
And I think you all do a kindergarten camp for incoming kindergartners.
We do. We started at K Camp just to get some of our kindergartners more prepared for kindergarten.
Sorry about that. I thought I had more battery life than I did. So there we go. Now we're juiced.
As long as we didn't lose you.
Yes.
So how many kindergartners? Is it every incoming kindergartner?
It is not every incoming. It is mostly targeted to students who did not have a pre-K program or were not in a pre-K program, who need to learn how to do school and have maybe been at home. And so we kind of reach out to and work with some of our community partners. Head Start, United Way supports this program and helps us reach out to some of those families. And so we partner with them and we kind of do the Brigance and do an assessment, like a pre and post for those students who are in that. Again, I think it's just offered 4 weeks in the month of June to kind of get those those students who may not have had those opportunities to kind of get in to a school building. And we try to make sure, or try to match up. We don't operate in all of our schools, but we try to, if the student we know is going to be attending a specific school, we try to match it up and make sure that they can get into that school if it's available.
Wonderful. So I know we've heard a lot about all the interventions you all are doing, the research-based interventions, the different programs that are in place. So many exciting programs and summer camp and things of that nature. I wanted to quickly, kind of before we wrap up, but a little bit about, do you have tutoring or other after-school programs or anything else that students are a part of to kind of help mitigate that learning loss, or really to help move students forward?
Yeah, so we do have some after-school programs that are available in some of our schools. We have after-school daycare in some, and they offer, you know, maybe some time to work on homework, but it's not really as targeted. We do have some tutors at U of V, the University of Evansville. We partner with some of those students and education students, and they may come and do some tutoring with students on a volunteer basis during that time. Some of our after-school programs, I know we work with the Boys and Girls Club and do some other community partners that where it's not maybe 100% academic focused, but they also kind of build relationships with kids and encourage them. And it's just another adult to kind of touch base with those students, to kind of make sure those students are staying on track academically and doing their best, that kind of thing. But I think there are some programs that do focus on some tutoring, and it's school by school. It's not a full-on district initiative for our after-school programs.
As we look towards the end of today's webinar, are there other strategies that you wanted to highlight that would be helpful for districts and schools really to support their students? And then thinking about like the teachers who are here, and the instructional strategies, or anything you can share with ideas for them to help in the classroom.
Yeah, I think really that team approach is so important. I relied heavily on my teachers when we would be discussing students in MTSS meetings, because you're with them on a day-to-day basis, you know, so many hours a day working with that student and know them very well. In addition, you probably also know their families really well. And so to really provide that perspective, to give us that picture of that whole child, like I said, those teachers are on those front lines working so closely with those students and families. They can really help provide that information to the teams.
And using your assessments to make sure that you're targeting the correct skills for kiddos if they're needing decoding versus comprehension. You know, a lot of times we find, even though they're below the 20th percentile, they may need decoding work or they may need comprehension, but you don't want to put a comprehension student into a decoding skill because that's not where their need is. And the other thing that I can think of is adding those multisensory strategies into your instruction, just to hit all the different pathways to getting learning into long-term memory, just to help support them.
Mm-hmm. And really taking the time and building the relationships with those students in your classroom, and getting to know them and their families and where that student is coming from, to be able to support that student all around.
It sounds like you all are really doing a great job utilizing multiple measures to make sure that you see who that child is, and you're also building in flexibility into the school day to make sure that there's time to target that, which is really amazing. I know that takes a lot of work up front in PLCs and scheduling of the school day and building out those blocks for intervention. So it's great that you're really doing all that, and you're giving your educators the opportunity to utilize that data from all of the measures that you're using to make sure you really are targeting those kids and closing those gaps.
And that tracking that progress. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say it takes a lot of work and a lot of teamwork, but I think utilizing all the tools and the more data we can look at and analyze to be able to make good decisions, the better.
So in looking at the questions from the box, yeah, meetings to review data. Let me see if I can, which reports and communications are sent to parents during the process? Are there a lot of parent meetings to review the data?
And that is something we notify parents with a letter at the beginning when we identify the student who may be in need of intervention. We do send home progress reports with students, but this year being our very first year utilizing EasyCBM, I don't know if families were receiving those printouts or those PDFs of those graphs, but I think teachers, in talking with parents and families, are going to be utilizing some of these reports. In addition to, we're also switching this year to a new student information system that will be have a lot more parent-friendly component as far as a parent app and things like that, that information can be sent more easily home besides just paper and pencil and a note coming home in a folder, right? That may or may not get lost. yeah, get lost along the way. But I think also trying to bring our parents back and connect with those families and connect them back into the school building. We couldn't have parents in for a year or so, but now we're back and inviting them in and having more parent meetings and having more teacher meetings and working with those families to kind of support their student and giving them some strategies they can use at home too. But yes, hopefully we'll see more of those progress reports and graphs being sent home next year.
Great, because I know parents definitely want to help and want to know what tangibly they can do to support their students at home. So
yeah.
With our switch to Power Schools, I mean, I feel like they're going to have access to that anytime they want, which always opens up questions and opens up that line, you know, or opportunity for communication. Where when you're sending it home in a folder, like Brenna was saying, you don't know if it gets there. And
yeah.
Yes. Right. Anything else, Christina?
Nope, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. And like I said, I think you ladies did an amazing job of sharing how you utilize all those data points and get it done for your students. So thank you for that.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us today. We are just about out of time, but please stay tuned for our next webinar scheduled for July the 11th. We will be off for July 4th, so enjoy that time away. And we're going to look at strategies for creating a positive environment for test administration and analyzing assessment data. So we look forward to another great discussion that day. And we would love to hear what you all are doing in your schools to help students achieve to their fullest potential. So share with us your success stories and how you're helping students grow in their reading skills, what interventions you all are using, what data you're looking at to identify those foundational skill gaps, and beneficial reports that you all look at and scores to identify those specific items and skills in which students are needing some support. So tell us what you're doing by tagging us on social media and keep in touch. Anything else to add? All right, well, thank you to everyone who joined us and our audience. We hope to see you again for another webinar. And until next time, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.